I'm Calev Ben-Dor, Director of Research at BICOM. I'm joined by research fellow Lauren Mellinger. She was one of the authors of a recent strategic assessment by BICOM, Hezbollah's hold on Lebanon, implications for a third Lebanon war. Lauren, one of the things we talk about is political domestic changes within Lebanon over the past year. What do you think the main components of those changes have been?
Well, I think one of the most relevant changes, most important changes, has been the recent comments by the new Lebanese president, who was elected after a 29-month vacuum. He, in February, spoke with Egyptian reporters and made numerous comments indicating that, in his eyes, in the view of the Lebanese government, which he is a spokesperson of now, and the Lebanese army, are now cooperating with one another. And in the next war, he expects them to continue that cooperation, which presents Israel with a new strategic dilemma, what to do in the event of a third conflict with Lebanon.
I mean, in 2006, just at the onset of what was known as the Second Lebanon War, there were these major policy debates within Israel over how to respond to a local Hezbollah incident. Do they just respond to Lebanon? Do they hit the Lebanese infrastructure, which is what the IDF Chief of Staff, Dan Khalutz, wanted? The late Mayor Dagan, who was then Chief of the Mossad, actually wanted Israel to hit Syria.
And the Americans were urging the Israelis to refrain from hitting any
Absolutely. There's these famous stories that Condi Rice picks up the phone to Olmert, and while this debate is going on, basically warns him, or kind of in American talk, they basically say... Strongly suggest, don't hit the Lebanese. But of course there are certain guiding principles there that don't apply anymore. It was, I think, Hariri's government. He was considered a friend of the West. The Lebanese army, in some ways, the perception was they wanted to go south. They just weren't able to. They were against Hezbollah. So that debate was taking place within a certain context that, based on what you just said, doesn't apply anymore.
Right. The Lebanese president's comments confirmed that Hezbollah and the Lebanese government are now essentially one and the same. And in the event that hostilities commence, they should be regarded as one and the same according to international law. So,
if a conflict were to break out, what do you think we'd be seeing?
You'd likely see a massive aerial campaign from the Israeli Air Force early on, which has operational benefits and strategic benefits. Operationally, it helps the Israelis take out the rocket targets earlier on. It's still difficult for Israel to be able to develop a mechanism to withstand a sustained aerial campaign by Hezbollah, because they now have a massive rocket arsenal.
So that's the other thing that's changed since 2006, whereas I think, is it 119 rockets a day or something that Hezbollah were able to fire, it's now, the estimate is around 1,000, even with David Sling and Iron Dome and even potentially the Arrow.
Right.
Israel doesn't have the capacity to deal with all of those, and the types of missiles that they have are far more sophisticated. Some of them are kind of GPS tracking. They can hit strategic sites, they can hit civilian strikes. In some ways, Israel will need to take these out as quickly as possible.
Right. They now have a very robust arsenal. The added complication to that is new reports that have now been confirmed in the last couple of months, confirmed by Israeli intelligence, that Iran has been helping Hezbollah build underground weapons production facilities in southern Lebanon.
Well, two of the interesting things that came out of the recent Herzliya conference, one was about this weapons factory within Lebanon, and the other thing that a lot of different Israeli and international officials were talking about was this land corridor that Iran are trying to build in. And if either of those happen successfully, that basically allows for the transfer of far more strategic weapons than Hezbollah have. So why do you think Israel is, in some ways, publicising? They're publicising the cooperation that they believe takes place between Hezbollah and the Lebanese army. They're publicising the sites in the south that they say Hezbollah are using. What do you think is behind the strategy of kind of telling everyone what the plan is in advance?
Well, I think a number of issues are relevant to answer this question. I think that 10 years ago, people forget now, but 10 years ago, in the initial phases of the Second Lebanon War, Israel had a lot of support from the international community to strike back against Hezbollah, including vocal statements of support from Arab leaders. It was after the damage continued and Lebanon really got hit badly, particularly in civilian areas, which was the fault of Hezbollah for hiding rocket launchers there. But after the extent of the damage continued, public opinion started to change. I think in this case, publicizing the fact that there is now collusion, a new hit word these days, between Hezbollah and the government of Lebanon makes it, will have a deterrent effect, hopefully to urge the international community to apply what pressure they can to the Lebanese government to do what they can to prevent Hezbollah from attacking Israel. May have a deterrent effect within Lebanon itself if the Israelis make clear that the scale and scope of the damage will be massive and unprecedented and will largely affect Lebanese civilians. Then perhaps forces within Lebanon can act to deter Hezbollah from taking action now.
So there is an international mechanism, in theory, that is supposed to, in some ways, disarm Hezbollah. It's UN Security Council Resolution 1701. It's signed at the end of the Second Lebanon War, and it's supposed to push Hezbollah away from the border. The Lebanese army is supposed to take control. It's supposed to disarm. I mean, it hasn't happened.
It's been an abject failure since August of 2006 when it went into effect. We saw a couple of months ago, Hezbollah gave a media tour of the border area to a number of journalists. I mean, this is not what you're supposed to do if the UN is supposed to clear the South out of anyone other than the Lebanese army.
And several years ago, there was a story that there was an explosion, one assumes some sort of rocket arsenal being exploded, or factory.
Or factory.
And when UNIFIL come to check it out, it's just made very clear to them that they're not welcome there, and they don't go. And there's a story of the 6 Spanish UNIFIL soldiers that are killed in a roadside bomb. That there seems to be just a kind of a warning that you're not welcome here in South Lebanon.
But I would stress that this is an area where really the international community has been falling down on the job for the last decade. I've done research tours of the border area and spoken off the record with rank and file members of UNIFIL who have said, listen, Hezbollah is incredibly strong. They are incredibly powerful. It's not that we don't want to fulfill the terms of this mandate. We don't have the strength to be able to do it effectively.
So that touches on what are the policy options for the international community. So I think in the paper, one of the very clear things that we write is that the UK currently have a policy of differentiating between the military wing, which is on the terror list of Hezbollah, and the political wing that isn't. Which
Israel has been arguing for years is an artificial
distinction.
It's
a completely artificial
the Lebanese
distinction.
president's comments from a few months ago essentially proved. Lebanon and Hezbollah are one and the same.
Right. So one very clear recommendation is that should be revisited, and I think there's also interesting policy options on 1701. One is that it should be beefed up in order to do its job. Another is that actually the whole component of the resolution itself should be upgraded to a Chapter 7, which gives kind of the military more ability to implement. I think these are things that the international community needs to consider in terms of what to do, because it's clear that Hezbollah is rearming. It's clear that 1701 is failing. It's clear that in a future war, which I don't think either of us think is necessarily around the corner, Hezbollah are busy with other things, but in a future conflict, the damage will be extremely great on both sides. That after such a war, the international community will say, well, what can we do, etc. And really, rather than thinking about it afterwards, they should be focused on how they can try and reduce the chances of it now.
Exactly. I would say neither side really wants war, interested in a war. And Hezbollah's bogged down in Syria, despite the sometimes bellicose rhetoric of their Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah. They're not really interested in starting up with Israel.
I had a meeting with Amos Harel a few months ago, and he said the region is always 2 missteps away, or 2 miscalculations away from a war. And so I think there is this thing that a war is not around the corner, but you can imagine a scenario where it happens, and Hezbollah have also been trying for a while now to create an additional front against Israel on the Golan. We don't know how the Syrian ceasefire is going to in the south is going to pan out. We don't know if there's going to be an Iranian or Lebanese presence alongside Israel's border. These things can deteriorate very quickly, and it's something that the international community should be aware of now and move towards trying to alleviate.